First on the agenda today is Representative Sundin with House File 2986. Mr. Chair, please introduce your bill.
Thank you, Chair Cagle. I will move 2986 be re-referred to the General Register. I have with me today Phil Qualley with UTU Smart Transportation Division to lead off, but first a few comments. The railroad workers in Minnesota contacted me last year regarding questions and concerns they had with MnDOT's Freight Rail Office Inspections Program. I encourage them to work with the department to gain consensus and draft legislation to improve state rail safety inspections. The more I have heard about working conditions on the railroad lines and yards in Minnesota, it appears this legislation is in fact necessary. I am pleased to present House File 2986, which I understand is consensus language with the department and UTU Smart Transportation Division to assure state rail safety statutes are enforced. This legislation will improve rail inspection and railroad industry safety. Both parties are committed to working together for railroad safety. I ask for your support for House File 2986, and I'll turn this over to Mr. Phil Qualley.
Welcome to the committee, Mr. Qualley. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Madam Chair Cagle, good afternoon, committee members. Thank you. My name is Philip Qualley. I am a state legislative director for the Smart Transportation Division, Sheet Metal, Air Rail, and Transportation, formerly the United Transportation Union. I am a railroad conductor of 40 years, yardmaster, remote control locomotive operator. I'm also a member of the Switching Operation Fatality Analysis Team with the Federal Railroad Administration, a 12-person group that is consisting of the American Association of Railroads, the short lines, FRA, the NTSB, and labor unions to assure that railroad workers do not get killed. I will just be very brief with House File 2986. We'd like to thank you for hearing House File 2986 inspection program requirements. The railroad workers have a great deal of respect and appreciation for the efforts of the Minnesota Department of Transportation Railroad Inspection Office. We believe policy language set forth in House File 2986 enjoys consensus language between rail labor and the department. We are proud to have worked to facilitate Minnesota's participation in the Federal Railroad Administration State Partnership Program during the 2000 and 2007 and 2008 biennium. House File 2986, passage of this bill, will assure state statutes at Chapter 219 and other applicable statutes have full compliance. Passage into law of House File 2986 is necessary. Thank you very much on behalf of our 1,200 members in Minnesota. We'd appreciate your support.
Thank you. Next up on the list, we have David Brown. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Brown. Please state your name for the record and continue with your testimony.
Well, good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Dave Brown, and I am the Region National 3 and Minnesota State Legislative Chairman of the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, the founding member of the Division of International Brotherhood of Teamsters Rail Conference. For 157 years, the BLT has continued to work with industry, the government, federal agencies, and other rail unions to make certain that railroads provide for the safety of our members, the public, and the environment. I want to express my appreciation for the opportunity to provide this committee with our position for much-needed improvements to the state rail inspection program and commissioners' requirements. We agree and support this legislation's guidance for the commissioner's ability to effectively process and enforce non-compliant railroad safety issues, and supports the state rail inspectors in their duties of inspecting and reporting road safety requirements, along with the training and tools necessary to successfully conduct their mission of rail safety. We feel House File 2986 provides transparency when the results of the reported defect are made available to the reporting party and union safety representatives. We feel this bill gives valuable protections for the businesses and citizens that rely on rail transportation to get their products to market in a safe and efficient manner through the state rail inspectors' expertise of inspecting railroads for defects and the commissioners' processing enforcements of any non-compliant issues. We support and fully agree with the previous testimony of the Sheet Metal, Air, and Rail Transportation Union on House File 2986. I ask your support of the House File 2996, providing the commissioners and the state rail safety inspectors the necessary knowledge, instruments, and tools to accurately and investigate and evaluate and report non-compliant safety issues on our state's railroads. We encourage you to vote yes for the safety legislation. I wish to thank Representative Sundin for bringing this important rail safety issue forward. And I want to thank the members of this committee for the opportunity to have my testimony heard here today.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to testify on this bill? Seeing none, we'll move to member questions then. Representative Brand?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So last year, just outside my district, on the other side of the river, there was a train derailment. And it included empty cars, thankfully, but there was also a two-man crew, and both of those folks were injured. And it was a washout. So I could only imagine, back in the 1900s, late 1800s, washouts were something that happened quite frequently, but I can only imagine in this 21st century that we would be able to prevent people from being injured as a result of a rail washout. But here we are in 2019, well, we're in 20 now, but back in 2019, by gosh, there was a rail washout that caused a crash. Thankfully, nobody was killed, but the engine, I saw the aftermath of the engine, it was on fire and it was destroyed. Diesel fuel was leaking into the environment. It was not good. It was not a good situation. And so thank you for bringing forth this legislation. I'm going to sign on as a co-author to this bill, and I hope that we can get this to the governor's desk this year. Thank you.
Representative Hornstein?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chair Sundin, for bringing this forward. I strongly support this as well. And I've had a real interest in this issue in general since the disaster in Canada in 2012 that took 47 lives. My question would be maybe to either of the testifiers. Over the last couple of years, I've tried to bring to the body's attention the fact that Minnesota has more rail miles per capita than many states, but we have less inspectors than states that have fewer rail mileage. And I'm wondering if you feel that at least the number, I know that we're dealing with the training of the inspectors here, but are you satisfied with the number of inspectors that we have in the state of Minnesota?
Mr. Brown?
Chair and Representative Hornstein, I believe that we certainly do need more rail inspectors to be on the job, being that there is a large amount of product that's moved through the state, border to border, coming in and going out, that with the type of equipment that we have, some of the equipment is 18th century technology, some of it's 19th century technology, and it's metal on metal. And we have issues that only the expertise that the rail inspectors that we have and the FRA together, when the FRA is very slim on their personnel, that we need to step up and help to have people in place to assist them and assist the citizens of the state for a safe rail network.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Detmer?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and to the testifiers, if I'm working in the yard, I have ex-students of mine that do work in the yard. If I'm working in the yard, how is this bill going to affect me in terms of safety?
Mr. Qualley?
Madam Chair, committee members, thank you. First of all, Representative, we're proud to have your constituent as a member of our union. The way things work on the railroad is our task, of course, is safe behaviors every day and to work safely and report defects to the carrier. Unfortunately, when we report defects to the carriers, oftentimes we don't see them getting repaired. They could be walkway issues, they could be lighting issues, they could be other safety issues that the men and women who operate the railroads, and we're under contract, really want to improve our railroad. At that point, once the railroad is notified of a defect or of a safety issue, our local legislative representatives or safety representatives for no contractual authority will contact the carrier and say, hey, is this getting fixed? When that doesn't quite work and they do not get a satisfactory response and the defect or the unsafe condition is not repaired, they elevate it to the state committee office. we get involved and encourage remediation of the safety problems. Unfortunately, then, what has occurred is the railroads simply don't want to repair the safety defect. They will concentrate on behaviors. Of course, that's like telling the Pope how to be Catholic. Of course, we want to work safely, but we need a safe physical plant. Our office will write a complaint then, to answer your question, Representative, to MnDOT's rail office and ask them to investigate and ask them to, take care of the issue with the carrier and enforce the statutes generally at Minnesota State Statutes, Chapter 219. That's what we strive to do, and how this bill will improve safety then is to assure that state rail safety inspectors actually enforce the state statutes.
Madam Chair, okay, just kind of maybe give us a little I have a follow question here. What's the timeline to get something fixed? If I'm working on the yard and I see a real issue here, currently, what's the timeline to get something fixed, or maybe it doesn't get fixed?
We expect
Mr. Cole?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, committee members, I'm sorry. Representative, we want the defects fixed immediately. It's a safety hazard. Unfortunately, in the matter of UTU versus the BNSF, the first notice to the carrier was filed in 2015, and after going through the administrative law process, the matter was settled in 2018 in October with BNSF stipulating agreement acceding to comply with all the state statutes. So in other words, we had unsafe conditions in a BNSF yard for 3.5 years. Actually, more than 4 years, because the stipulated agreement gave them time to bring in the resources to correct the unsafe conditions.
Okay. And maybe, Madam Chair, just a quick question here. I'm looking through the bill. Is there any additional cost to implement this piece of legislation?
Madam Chair, committee members, we do not believe so. A fiscal note had been issued, if I'm not mistaken, for $38,000 from the department prior to the transportation hearing, although in the last hearing, the director of the rail office, the Freight and Commercial Waterways, I believe Mr. Gardner testified that there would not be a cost and that they could assume that any additional cost. And again, essentially what we're trying to do with this policy language is simply assure that they are trained and enforce and have the equipment to enforce state statutes. So to answer your question, no, not that we are aware of.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions from the members? Representative Fabian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to the testifiers, and I don't remember your names, I apologize, okay? But you stated in your testimony that we are dealing with 18th and 19th century technology. Can you give me an example of that? Because I'm interested to know.
Mr. Brown?
Madam Chair, Representative, committee members, I've been a railroad employee for 49 years. I've held every position that you can in the operating craft. That means as far as a switch tender all the way up yardmaster, and now I hold as a locomotive engineer for the last quite a few years. After 49 years, you kind of forget how many positions. But anyways, to answer your question, there is what they call dark territory that has been in effect since the beginning of railroading, where there is no signals. That's why they call it dark territory. The 19th century is the type of pin lifters and type of knuckles and the apparatuses of the rail cars themselves. Some is antiquated, some is the best that the technology is available, but that's what I was meant by 18th century and 19th century technology.
Representative Fabian?
Thank you. So, well, first of all, I think you mean the 1800s and 1900s,
Yes.
because the 18th century is the 1700s. But that being said, so if that's still there, what's wrong with that? I mean, you're making it sound like the railroads don't want to keep their trains on the track and keeping it running. What's wrong with that technology? What's not working?
Mr. Brown?
Madam Chair, Representative, committee members. What's wrong with that is that because of its the older equipment and that the type of equipment, the steel on steel, is a factor that you have to consider for the high incidence of maintenance, failures with the equipment, failures with the trackage, the right-of-ways. That all has to be kept a good eye and watched on. It's a continuous process.
Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So is our technology different than, say, Canada's technology when it comes to these things?
Mr. Brown?
Madam Chair, committee members, Representative, Canada, actually, we have what we call the Federal Railroad Administration. They have Rail Canada. Rail Canada actually is more stringent than in a lot of procedures and inspections than the Federal Railroad Administration.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Representative Hornstein mentioned the train accident that he was referring to. They have more stringent rules and regulations, I believe you're saying, in Canada. Recently, there was a train derailment carrying oil cars. By the way, if we had Line 3 in the ground and replaced, that would help us out a lot, but that's a whole nother issue. If that's the case, then there shouldn't be any train derailments in Canada. I'm not exactly sure what we're going for here if we're, I mean, what you're putting in place here, is that going to be stronger than Canada's requirements, less than, or the same?
Mr. Brown?
Madam Chair, Representative, committee members, I can't speak on behalf of that at this time, on whether it would be more stringent. I do believe that having the expertise, the training, and the tools to properly do the job is paramount in the safety of the railroads themselves and for the workers that work with this equipment.
Representative Fabian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the train derailment that I'm familiar with most recently is just across the border from Baudette, Minnesota, over towards Emo, and there was 25 or 30 cars that derailed there. So I'm not exactly sure of why we need this, but I'm continuing to listen. To the other testifier, you said that railroads don't want to fix defects. I wrote that down when you said it. Give me an example. You said there was one that was unsafe condition for 3.5 years. What was that?
Mr.
Yes,
Polley?
I'll answer both of your questions if I may. The scope of this bill, Madam Chair and Representative and committee members, the scope of this bill is to state statutes at Chapter 219 and having nothing to do with Canada or some of the mainline federal regulation and federal regulated caused derailments. To your question, this matter was the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway placing non-compliant yard ballast in a railroad yard under State Statute 219501. And it just, it took that long, and what we, to your question, you're going to the heart of a problem in our industry, and that's why we need this bill, is to have state inspectors enforce state statutes. We see a delay and physical plant defects, particularly in yards, just don't get repaired. The carriers are short staff, the maintenance of way workers. We have seen where they're cutting back on the rail, the angle bars, the equipment necessary to maintain the track, as well as the ballast. And so, for example, on the Union Pacific Railway, we have pages and pages of an electronic, which we can present to you if you wish, Madam Chair and committee members, of what they call a safety hotline, where workers have reported safety issues. They receive an administrative response, but the actual physical plant issues don't get repaired. I can't speak for the carriers, but what we see is cutbacks and cutbacks and cutbacks. So under the Railway Labor Act, workers have the right to represent our safety exclusive and independent of any other entity. And we want to go home safely with all of our limbs. Therefore, we seek assistance from the state to enforce state statutes.
One more, Representative
Thank you,
Fabian?
Madam Chair. I don't know much about railroads. I'd like to say I know as much about railroads as hogs do about Sunday school, but what is yard ballast? I don't know what that is.
Thank you very
Mr.
much,
Pauly.
Madam Chair. And yard ballast is First of all, we're thrilled to have Thief River Falls as a on-duty point in your district, and great men and women in far northwestern Minnesota that operate the CP Railway and the CN Railway. Yard ballast is 3/4 inch ballast, and it holds track structure in yards. It is capable, I've brought a couple of sieves to demonstrate the state statute. One is a 1 1/4 inch sieve, and the other is a 1 inch sieve. And the way the statute was constructed was that when you have yard ballast, that you should be able to take a shovel and drop the ballast through the sieve, and 90% of the ballast should be able to drop through the first sieve. 100% of the ballast must be able to drop through the second sieve. The importance, the opposite ballast is called a road ballast, which is 3 to 4 inch rock. And previous legislatures heard the testimony and can demonstrate that there's a real good reason that you don't put road ballast in yards, because it causes cumulative trauma injuries to workers. So yard ballast, as long as it holds a drainage and structure, is the prescribed ballast, and it's also consistent with the American Railway Engineering Manufacturing standards. Thank you.
Representative Hornstein?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to respond to Representative Fabian's question, my understanding is that following that disaster in Lac Megantic in 2012, it was July of 2012, that the Canadian government did strengthen their rail safety protocols, and particularly on liability. I think that was one I know for sure is different than the United States, but I'd be happy to research that a little, Representative Fabian. But my understanding is that they took some pretty drastic and immediate action. They lost 47 souls that day, and so it was a pretty big issue in Canada.
So we'll move to the last question for Representative Vogel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And back to the implications of the bill itself, looking at lines 1 through 8 and 1 through 9, I guess I'm led to believe that the inspections are not being done now.
Mr. Qualley.
Madam Chair, committee members, I think it would be much more appropriate for the department to comment on that. It would be our preference that they do so. Although to Chair Hornstein's question prior, we are aware that there are great constraints on the inspectors' schedules. For example, we know that the Federal Railroad Administration has lost one of their federal hazardous material inspectors, and so therefore there's more workload on the state's hazardous material inspector. But again, this bill is designed to assure that our state statutes are complied with.
Madam Chair.
Representative Vogel.
So it sounds to me that there probably isn't adequate staff right now to do this, from what you just said. Where are the people going to come from to do this?
Mr. Qualley.
Madam Chair, committee members, I'm not sure that that was my testimony. I think that they can do fine work with who they have now. Yes, they are constrained, but what the intent of the bill is not to increase the number of inspectors. Rather, the inspectors that are here now do inspect and enforce state statutes and are supplied with the proper materials or measurement instruments, as well as be trained in state statutes.
Madam Chair, I know you want to move on, but
Representative Vogel.
maybe there's somebody from the department that could answer what's going on, because I'm confused, because I'm hearing the inspections aren't being done, so therefore we need a statute to say they need to be enforced. And I'm wondering why they're not being done now if there's adequate staff to do it.
Looks like Ms. Witt's making her way up. Sure. And then we do have a number of other bills on the agenda too, so we could, hopefully, I have you on the list. Welcome to the committee. State your name for the record.
Afternoon, committee. My name is Jennifer Witt, and I'm with MnDOT. So we are doing inspections. We have 4 inspectors, I believe. Let's see, I looked it up on my phone. There are 4 inspectors. They have specialties within the inspection area. So some of them are for hazardous materials, some of them inspect trackage. Motive power is another one. And so we have 4 across the state. So that does keep us pretty constrained. We have over 4,500 miles of track that we look at, and there are 4 quadrants that these people operate in. Does that answer your question?
Representative Vogel?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, it partially answers it because as I read this, it says that the job isn't being done. You're going to be mandated to do it. But what I'm also hearing is that the people that you have, which are 4, are probably maybe inadequate to do this because you don't have the time or the resource. And that's really, who's going to do this? If we enact this statute, it sounds like we're not doing something, we need to do it, and therefore the responsibility is going to be passed to you to do it. So the question is, can you do it with the 4 people you have, or are you going to take more resources to comply with this new statute?
Ms. Witt?
Chair, Representative Vogel, we are complying with this. We do the best that we can with the people that we have. There is a fiscal note, and the cost is 0. Part of this has to do with, as Mr. Qualley explained, the tools. You know, we need to provide those and make sure that those are with all of our inspectors. And so we have brought that up to compliance. And we do feel, we worked on this bill together, and we do feel that we are either in process with all of these, especially the complaint process. We are working that out together in a group. And the rest of it, we feel that we are doing. I mean, it's in state statute already. We're not changing the statute about what we have to do. We are just, he's just saying that we have to do it. So the department is okay with this. Does that help?
Thank you, Madam Chair, but, you know, excuse my skepticism. When it says that something isn't being, we need a statute to say something needs to be done because it's already in statute that it's supposed to be done, but now we're going to add the statute saying that it needs to be done, which it should be done anyway. And I'm hearing that there's already sufficient resources, so either the department isn't doing their job with the resources they have, or it's going to take more resources. So that's why I'm questioning this. I also then go down to 115 to 117, and it says that the safety inspection program must supply state inspectors with measurement tools required to properly inspect.
Mm-hmm.
Do we already have those and not using them, or are you going to have to acquire more tools?
Ms. Witt?
Chair, Representative Vogel, we did come up, it was the ballast sieves that we didn't have for a particular inspector. So we have gotten more sieves, so we have those now. And although, I mean, we would be happy to get more staff because there is a lot of trackage across the state. At this point, we feel like this is us being told that they want us to truly make this a priority, and we have. And as for the complaint process, we are working on that with them to come up with something that works all of that out that we can all be happy with, or at least okay with.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Fabian?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I had one,
Oh,
I'm sorry. One
Representative
more, I
Voges.
guess.
Yes.
Before we leave this, I'm hearing that there's no fiscal note because there's absorbed cost. And yet I'm not hearing an assurance that there isn't going to be any additional cost. And I really think that if we're going to move forward with this thing, there should be a fiscal note that really details this out, because I believe, and I think everybody else here does as well, that if there's a need for this legislation, then there's a need for some additional resources of some type. And without a fiscal note that's exploring what they are, I think there's a bill being passed here that isn't going to have proper vetting because we don't know what the costs are. Thank you.
Representative Fabian?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to follow up on that, I believe that this bill should be going to Ways and Means. But that being said, I'm a father, coach, and teacher, and I oftentimes heard, oh, Dad, Mark said, or whatever, and I would call, after Eric told me that, and I'd call Mark and say what happened. What I'm hearing here is, and no disrespect meant, I'm hearing one side of the story. So I would, Madam Chair, like to hear from the railroads about these issues to find out what, quote, their side of the story is.
Is there anybody, well, we called to see if anybody else wanted to testify, and we didn't see anybody come down.
Can't hear you.
Chair Sundin, do you have any comment on that?
No, no, I don't. I don't have any one from the railroad that's ready to present. to my knowledge.
One more?
One last thing. The delays that we're talking about, and I appreciate the concerns, but I think that there are, from Ms. Witt's testimony, it sounds like we may be understaffed, and it takes a while, even when you get a concern, a complaint, whatever it is, or your inspectors are just out doing their stuff. I can't help but think that a part of the delay, once something is filed or received, isn't the result of a lack of resources for the railroad inspectors. Am I wrong?
Ms. Witt?
Chair, Representative Fabian, I would say no. I would say that we work in a very collaborative environment. I mean, MnDOT does not employ police. So, you know, it's not as though we're going out and doing any of that kind of thing. We work in a collaborative environment. And when we get a complaint, part of what we do is we talk with whatever railroad and whatever people are involved within it and try to make some kind of solution that way.
So, Madam
Does that
Chair,
help?
just last one.
Sure.
So just to be clear, that collaborative environment involves, I'll say, the union, the workers,
Yes.
you, and the railroads, correct?
Ms. Witt?
Chair, Representative, yes.
Thank you.
That's what I would say.
So we do have room 200 after committee, approximately 6 o'clock if we need it.
This will be a quick one.
So.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Detmer?
Just a quick question. Are the requirements in this bill, do they also match up with the federal requirements? Are they the same or they're different?
Mr. Qualley?
Madam Chair, committee members know, federal regulations are at 49 CFR 200 to 299. Those are separate federal regulations. The state inspection or state statutes are separate and apart. They cannot be redundant to the federal, otherwise they would be federally preempted. So to answer your question, no.
Thank you, thank you.
All right. No other questions. I'd like to move to a vote. So Representative Sundin? you
I will
your motion?
renew my motion that House File 2986 be re-referred to the General Register.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Motion prevails.